Chapter 1. Passion of Light and Shadow. Ellie was nestled in a corner of the studio filled with photo samples, and the air around her seemed to be filled with those frozen moments. She was flipping through the photos in her hand one by one, and her phone suddenly vibrated beside her. The screen lit up and an email from Derek popped up. "Ellie, are you free next Tuesday afternoon? This theme must be you." Ellie's fingers unconsciously rubbed gently on the screen. Staring at these short lines, her heartbeat suddenly accelerated. In the past 3 months, Derek Harper, a talented photographer who has become famous in the photography world, has been like a dazzling light, breaking into her originally ordinary life without warning. Ellie still remembers the scene of her first meeting with Derek. It was in a modeled attic studio. The afternoon sun shone through the dirty windows and slanted onto the ground, forming irregular pieces of light and shadow. Ellie stood in the middle of the studio, tugging at the corner of her clothes a little uncomfortably, and her eyes looked around from time to time. Derek walked in holding his beloved camera in his hand, and his eyes swept over Ellie, squinting slightly as if he was looking through the lens. "You are very special." He suddenly spoke, his voice low and magnetic, breaking the original silence. Ellie was stunned for a moment, and before she could react, Derek had already started fiddling with the photographic equipment. "Make the light softer," he said to his assistant, then turned and walked towards Ellie, adjusting the parameters of the camera as he walked. He stood in front of Ellie so close that Ellie could feel the warmth of his breath. "Look at me," Derek said softly. Ellie slowly raised her head and met his deep eyes, and for a moment she was a little absent-minded. The moment the camera was pointed at her, Ellie felt as if she was being pulled by an invisible force and entered a whole new world. Every shutter sound was like a gentle knock on her heart, and her eyes always followed Derek's every move. Sometimes he frowned slightly and adjusted her posture. Sometimes he raised the corners of his mouth and praised her performance softly. Under the flashing spotlight, Ellie's heartbeat was getting faster and faster. She couldn't tell whether it was because of nervousness or because a different feeling was quietly growing in her heart. After the photo shoot, Derek took the initiative to invite Ellie for coffee. They sat in a street cafe, and the sun shone through the gaps in the leaves on the table, forming patches of golden light. Derek talked about his love for photography. He said that photography was his way of capturing souls and every photo was a story. Ellie listened attentively, and the feeling in her heart became stronger when she saw Derek's focused expression when he spoke. Since then, Derek frequently invited Ellie to be his model. Every photo shoot was like a wonderful adventure. Derek could always find the most unique angle to capture Ellie's most moving moments. Under his guidance, Ellie gradually let go of herself and faced the camera more and more confidently. However, Ellie never thought that there was a terrible secret behind all this. She only saw Derek's persistence and art in his eyes, but ignored the occasional greed that flashed. She was intoxicated by the sudden attention and praise, and didn't realize that she was walking towards a carefully laid trap step by step. At this moment, looking at the email on her mobile phone, Ellie was both excited and nervous. She knew that once she agreed to this shoot, the relationship between her and Derek would have a new development. She bit her lip, hesitated on the screen for a moment and finally replied, "Okay." Ellie stood up, took a deep breath and put her phone in her bag. She looked out the window and the streets of the city were busy with cars and people were in a hurry. She didn't know what the upcoming shoot would bring her, but the excitement of the unknown made her irresistible. The door of the studio was suddenly pushed open, and a gust of cold wind poured in. Ellie turned around and saw a colleague walking in with a stack of documents. "Ellie, are you going to be a model for that big photographer again?" The colleague laughed and teased. Ellie smiled a little embarrassedly. "Well, he has a new theme." A colleague walked up to her and patted her on the shoulder. "Come on, maybe you can become a big model in the future." Ellie smiled and nodded, but she was a little uneasy. She returned to her seat and began to organize her things, but Derek's figure was all in her mind. As night fell, the city was lit up by lights. Ellie walked on the way home and her figure was reflected in the windows on the street. She looked at her reflection, her mouth slightly raised, and her heart was full of longing for the future. She didn't know that in the near future, this seemingly beautiful beginning would lead her into an abyss full of pain and despair. Chapter 2. The Disaster of Premature Aging. In the early morning, the sun pierced through the gaps in the heavy curtains with difficulty, leaving a thin strip of light on the floor of Ellie's bedroom. Ellie slowly woke up from her sleep, feeling sore all over as if she had been beaten up. She subconsciously raised her hand to rub her head, but her fingertips touched a strange rough texture. "What is this?" Ellie murmured in a daze and opened her eyes completely. With the faint light, she was horrified to find that she was holding a handful of silver hair in her hand. "No, this is impossible." She sat up suddenly and her movements were too hasty and her head was dizzy. Ellie stumbled to the bathroom and turned on the light. The face in the mirror froze her in place instantly. The person in the mirror had loose skin and wrinkles, and a head of white hair stuck to the scalp in a mess. Her eyes were full of fear and disbelief. How could she look like she was only 22 years old? How could this happen? What happened? Ellie's voice was trembling and crying. She frantically searched the bottles and jars on the sink, trying to find clues that could explain all this, but except for the aging face, everything was the same as usual. Ellie's first reaction was to call Derek. She ran back to the bedroom in a panic, grabbed the phone and dialed Derek's number with trembling fingers. There was only a monotonous busy tone on the other end of the phone over and over again and no one answered. She was unwilling to give up and dialed several times in succession, but it was still the same. "Derek, where are you? Why don't you answer the phone?" Ellie shouted at the phone, tears pouring out uncontrollably and sliding down her cheeks. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably, her mind was in chaos and countless terrible thoughts flashed through her mind. In the following days, Ellie seemed to have fallen into a dark abyss. She didn't dare to go out, afraid of seeing other people's strange eyes. She locked herself in the room and frantically searched for information about premature aging on the internet, but every result made her heart sink into deeper despair. Am I going to spend the rest of my life like this? Ellie curled up in the corner of the bed, hugged her knees and muttered to herself. She remembered the days when she used to shoot with Derek. Those beautiful moments have now become irony. Derek's tenderness and his praise now seem like a carefully planned scam. 3 months later, Ellie finally plucked up the courage to walk out of the house. She wrapped herself in a thick scarf, wearing a hat and sunglasses, trying to hide her aging face. She walked aimlessly in the park and the laughter around her was out of tune with her. Suddenly, a familiar voice came into her ears. "Good, keep this expression great." Ellie was shocked. It was Derek's voice. She subconsciously stopped and looked in the direction of the voice. Not far away, Derek was holding a camera and taking pictures of a young and beautiful girl. The girl was wearing a white dress and smiling brightly like a blooming flower. Derek stood aside, his eyes focused with a smile on his lips, and he looked exactly the same as when he took photos of Ellie. A complex emotion surged in Ellie's heart with anger, unwillingness, and more confusion. She quietly approached and hid behind a big tree, trying to figure out what was going on. At this moment, she noticed another figure behind the tree, Vivian. Vivian was Derek's girlfriend, and Ellie had met her several times before. At this moment, Vivian was standing behind the tree, staring at the camera tightly, with a distorted expression on her face, greedy and excited. Ellie had an ominous premonition in her heart. At the moment Derek pressed the shutter, Ellie saw an incredible scene. The smile on the face of the girl who was originally full of youth disappeared instantly. Replaced by wrinkles and fatigue, her skin quickly loosened and her hair turned gray. At the same time, Vivian's face was rosy, and the corners of her eyes that were originally slightly drooping became tight, and the whole person looked several years younger. What kind of magic is this? Ellie covered her mouth, not believing her eyes. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably, and the fear in her heart was replaced by anger. She finally understood that her premature aging was not accidental, but was calculated by Derek and Vivian. That camera must have a secret that cannot be told. It can capture the lifespan of the person being photographed and then transfer it to the caster. Countless thoughts flashed through Ellie's mind. She wanted to rush out to question Derek and Vivian and make them pay for what they did. But reason told her that it was not the right time yet. She took a deep breath, tried to calm herself down and quietly left the park. After returning home, Ellie sat in a dark room with only one thought in her mind: revenge. She began to collect all the information about Derek and Vivian and investigate the origin of the camera. She knew that this battle had just begun, and she would never let go of those who hurt her easily. Chapter 3: Chasing the Murderer in the Dark Alley. After Ellie escaped from the park, Her heart was burned by the flames of revenge and she could not calm down at all. She knew that if she wanted to bring down Derek and Vivian, she had to find out the secret behind the camera. So she began to ask around, not letting go of any possible clues, even if it was just a tiny glimmer of hope. Finally, someone mentioned a mysterious shop on a niche forum for photography enthusiasts. It is said that there are all kinds of strange items, including some related to supernatural powers. Ellie's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and her intuition told her that the shop might be the key to her search for answers. As night fell, the neon lights of the city flickered, and Ellie shuttled alone in the narrow streets. The hustle and bustle around seemed to have nothing to do with her, and the only thing in her mind was the location of the mysterious shop. As she got closer to her destination, the surrounding environment became more and more gloomy. The old buildings cast long shadows under the dim light, like monsters hidden in the dark. Ellie stood in front of an old wooden door, with an inconspicuous sign hanging on the door, engraved with a few blurred letters, which was exactly the place she was looking for. She took a deep breath, calmed her nervous mood, and then reached out and pushed the door open. The door creaked open slowly and a stale smell came to her face. The store was dimly lit and filled with all kinds of sundries, from ancient books to strange ornaments. A white-haired old man was sitting behind the counter, concentrating on wiping a copper ornament. When he heard the door open, he slowly raised his head and his eyes fell on Ellie. "Little girl, what do you want?" The old man's voice was hoarse and low, as if it came from the distant past. Ellie walked to the counter, hesitated for a moment, and then plucked up the courage to say, "I want to inquire about a camera. It is said that it is related to black magic and can absorb people's lifespan." The old man's hand paused and a hint of subtle surprise flashed in his eyes. He put down the ornaments in his hand, looked up at Ellie, and said after a moment of silence, "This kind of thing is not something you can ask casually. Why are you asking this?" Ellie bit her lip and a trace of pain flashed in her eyes. "I was harmed by it and I want revenge." The old man looked at her deeply, as if judging whether her words were credible. After a while he slowly said, "The camera is indeed a product of black magic. It was born in the 19th century and was made by an evil magician to maintain eternal youth. Those who use it can transfer the life of others to themselves by photographing them. But this kind of magic is taboo and will be backfired unless..." "Unless what?" Ellie asked eagerly. "Unless someone is willing to be a sacrifice." The old man's eyes revealed a trace of helplessness and sadness. A surge of anger surged in Ellie's heart. "Derek and Vivian, they used this method to harm many people. I must make them pay the price." The old man sighed. "Child, this magic is very powerful, you have to be careful." After leaving the shop, Ellie did not go home but came to the library. She decided to start with Derek and Vivian's past and look for more evidence. In the archives of the library, she flipped through a lot of newspapers and magazines, and finally found some reports about them. It turned out that Derek and Vivian had already begun to emerge a few years ago. Their photography works often attracted people's attention with their unique style and mysterious atmosphere. But as time went on, some strange things began to happen. The models around them always got sick inexplicably, and some even died suddenly at a young age. Ellie looked at the yellowed clippings, and the anger in her heart burned more and more. She realized that she was not the first victim, and many people were harmed by this evil couple. She secretly vowed to seek justice for them. In the next few days, Ellie began to visit people who had had contact with Derek and Vivian. She found an assistant who had worked for them before, and learned from him that Derek and Vivian were always very mysterious during the shooting, not letting anyone get close to the camera, and after each shooting they would become refreshed, while the models would become exhausted. Ellie also contacted the family of a victim. It was an elderly mother whose daughter had been Derek's model. Not long after the photo shoot, she suffered from a strange disease, aged rapidly, and eventually passed away. When the old woman saw Ellie, her eyes were full of sadness and despair. "My poor daughter, she is so young and so beautiful." The old man said, tears could not help flowing down. Ellie's heart was stabbed. She held the old man's hand and said, "Auntie, I will definitely avenge your daughter, and I will not let them get away with it." In the process of collecting evidence, Ellie also encountered some difficulties. Some people were afraid of offending Derek and Vivian and were unwilling to provide any information. Others simply did not believe what she said and thought she was making up stories. But Ellie did not give up. She firmly believed that the truth would always come out and her revenge plan would succeed. As the investigation deepened, Ellie gradually pieced together Derek and Vivian's criminal trajectory. She found that they usually chose young and dreamy girls as targets, tricked them into their side with false promises and sweet words, and then used cameras to record their lifespans. And those girls, after losing their lifespans, could only bear the double pain of body and mind alone, and finally disappeared silently from this world. Ellie looked at the increasing evidence in her hands, and her heart was angry and sad. She knew that she was getting closer and closer to the day of revenge, but at the same time she felt unprecedented pressure. Derek and Vivian were not ordinary criminals. They had powerful magical powers and it was not easy to defeat them. However, Ellie did not back down. She decided to continue to investigate in depth, find the weaknesses of the camera, and formulate a perfect revenge plan. She believed that justice might be late but would never be absent, and that one day Derek and Vivian would pay a heavy price for what they had done. Chapter 4. The Return of the Shadow Hunter. Ellie sat in a dim room, surrounded by piles of collected information and photos, which were the cornerstones of her revenge plan. The warm yellow desk lamp cast a halo of light, but it could not dispel the coldness in her eyes. She stared at the chat records with Derek on the computer screen, tapping her fingertips on the keyboard, repeatedly considering every word, thinking about how to arrange this revenge drama without any flaws. "I'm well now and I've been thinking about the new photography direction I talked to you about before. Do you have time to talk about it in detail?" After sending this message, Ellie leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. She knew that this was the first step in the revenge chess game and success or failure depended on this move. Half an hour later, the phone screen lit up and it was Derek's reply, "See you at the Old Place Cafe at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." A sneer appeared on the corner of Ollie's mouth, but a trace of nervousness flashed in her eyes. She knew that every conversation and every expression that followed would be related to the success or failure of revenge. The next day, Ellie dressed up carefully, put on a wig and put on exquisite makeup, trying her best to cover up the traces of premature aging. When she walked into the cafe, she saw Derek sitting in the corner with a cup of coffee in front of him, looking down at a magazine. Ellie took a deep breath, adjusted her expression and walked over pretending to be relaxed. "Long time no see, Derek." Ellie greeted with a smile and her voice was just the right amount of enthusiasm. Derek raised his head and his eyes stayed on her face for a moment. A trace of imperceptible suspicion flashed in his eyes, but he soon returned to his gentle smile. "Long time no see, Ellie, you look good." After the two exchanged a few pleasantries, Ellie got to the point. She took out the prepared plan and pushed it in front of Derek. "This is the time-themed shooting plan I have conceived during this period, please take a look." Derek took the plan and began to look through it carefully. Ellie observed his expression calmly, and saw his slightly frowned brows, and was secretly proud in her heart. She spent several weeks carefully designing this plan, which combines Derek's usual shooting style and cleverly implants her own revenge bait. The hedge between aging and beauty is an interesting entry point. Derek finally spoke with a hint of interest in his eyes. "However, it may be difficult to implement. I know there is an abandoned warehouse where the light and scene are very suitable," Ellie said immediately, "and I found a few models who are interested in this theme, and they are all very cooperative." Derek flipped through a few more pages, thought for a moment and said, "It sounds good, we can go to check it out next weekend." Ellie suppressed her excitement and nodded, "Great, then it's settled." After leaving the cafe, Ellie's mood did not relax at all. She knew that Derek had not completely let down his guard, and every step next had to be extra careful. After returning home, she checked every detail of the revenge plan again to make sure there were no omissions. It was the day of the scout. Ellie came to the abandoned warehouse in advance and arranged everything. When Derek arrived, he was attracted by the scene in front of him. The light in the warehouse poured through the dilapidated windows, forming golden beams of light, and dust was flying in the beams of light, creating a mysterious and textured atmosphere. "This place is really nice." Derek looked around and nodded in praise. Ellie followed him, introducing her shooting ideas while quietly observing his reaction. She found that in addition to the expectation for the shooting, there was also a hint of greed hidden deep in Derek's eyes. "The models will be in place next week and then we can officially start shooting," Ellie said. "Okay, I'm looking forward to it." Derek replied with a slight smile on his lips. After the site inspection, Ellie returned home and began to prepare the most important Prop A modified camera. This camera is the core of her revenge plan, and it contains a trap she carefully designed. She found a craftsman who is proficient in machinery and magic, and spent several weeks to cleverly integrate the reverse curse device into the camera. In the process of preparing the camera, Ellie also encountered some difficulties. The debugging of the curse device is very complicated, and the slightest mistake will lead to failure. Moreover, she must always be vigilant against Derek and Vivian's surveillance. Once, when she was debugging the camera in the craftsman's studio, she suddenly found a suspicious figure flashing outside the window. She immediately stopped what she was doing and walked carefully to the window to check, but found nothing. Did they find out? Ellie was secretly worried, but she did not back down. She knew that there was no turning back now and she had to speed up the pace of revenge. After several days and nights of hard work, the camera was finally transformed. Ellie looked at the camera in her hand, feeling nervous and excited. She knew that this camera would become her revenge blade and give Derek and Vivian a fatal blow. As the shooting day got closer, Ellie became more and more nervous. She repeatedly checked every link of the revenge plan to ensure that it was foolproof. At the same time, she was constantly adjusting her mentality, telling herself to be calm and composed and not to reveal any flaws. Chapter 5. Forging Spells. A few days ago, Ellie stood in front of an inconspicuous door with the crucial camera in her arms, her hands trembling slightly. Behind this door, her last hope for revenge was hidden, a craftsman who was proficient in magic tools. She took a deep breath and raised her hand to knock on the door. The door slowly opened and an old and mysterious atmosphere came to her face. The room was dimly lit and filled with all kinds of strange objects, from crystal balls emitting faint light to metal tools engraved with runes, which were shadowy in the shadows. The craftsman was a thin old man with sparse hair, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at Ellie and the camera in her hand with scrutiny. "You must help me, this camera is related to my life and death," Ellie said eagerly, her voice full of pleading. The old man was silent for a moment, stretched out his dry hand to take the camera, put it on the table and began to look at it carefully. "This is not an ordinary camera. What do you want to do with it?" He finally spoke, his voice hoarse but with unquestionable power. Ellie gritted her teeth and told him everything about her experience and revenge plan. "I will make this camera their nightmare and return everything they took away." Her eyes were burning with anger. After listening, the old man frowned and paced back and forth in the house. After a long time, he stopped and looked at Ellie. "Reverse curse is not a trivial matter. If you make a mistake, the backlash may take your life. I'm not afraid. As long as they can get the punishment they deserve, I'm willing to do anything," Ellie answered firmly. The old man pondered for a moment and finally nodded. "Okay, I'll help you. But you have to remember that this is a dangerous game and you can't make any mistakes at every step." In the following days, Ellie and the old man were busy day and night. The old man flipped out an ancient magic book from the corner. The words on it were obscure and difficult to understand. He put on his reading glasses and carefully studied every page, looking for a suitable reverse curse spell. Ellie assisted on the side, helping to prepare various strange materials, such as bat teeth, mandrake juice and ancient magic powder. During this process, Ellie remained vigilant at all times. She always felt that someone was watching her in the dark, and every time she walked on the street she felt that there was a pair of eyes behind her. Once, on the way to buy materials, she looked back inadvertently and seemed to see a familiar figure flash by, and the figure was very similar to Vivian. She immediately quickened her pace, her heart pounding, and she was relieved until she was sure that no one was following her. Returning to the workshop, she told the old man about her concerns. The old man looked solemn. "They must have noticed something, we must speed up the progress." Time was tight and Ellie and the old man worked day and night. The old man carefully disassembled the camera to expose the complex internal structure, and Ellie handed over the tools on the side, not daring to take her eyes away for a moment. The adjustment of every part and the engraving of every spell are related to the success or failure of the revenge plan. One day, Ellie was standing guard outside the workshop when she suddenly heard a quarrel outside. She nervously stuck to the door and listened only to hear someone say, "Have you seen a girl with a camera coming here?" Her heart sank suddenly. It was Derek's voice. "I don't know. There are people coming and going here every day. How could I notice it? Another voice answered. Ellie recognized that it was a peddler near the workshop. The footsteps gradually faded away. Ellie breathed a sigh of relief and hurried back to the house, urging the old man to speed up. The old man's forehead was full of sweat, but his hands were not flustered at all. He carefully embedded the metal piece engraved with the reverse curse into the camera and began to debug. The key to this reverse curse is the timing of the trigger. The old man said to Ellie while debugging, "You must ensure that the curse can take effect at the moment they press the shutter." Ellie nodded seriously, constantly simulating the scene of shooting in her mind, thinking about how to guide Derek and Vivian to use this camera. After weeks of hard work, the camera modification was finally completed. The old man handed the camera to Ellie, his face serious. "Remember, this is your only chance, don't make any mistakes." Ellie took the camera and felt its heavy weight, feeling nervous and excited. She knew that this battle of revenge had reached the final critical moment. Before leaving the workshop, Ellie thanked the old man again. The old man looked at her with a hint of worry in his eyes. "Child, be careful, the power of magic is unpredictable." Ellie walked out of the workshop, the sun shone on her body. She took a deep breath and hugged the camera tightly in her arms. She knew that she was about to face a thrilling duel, but she was ready to make Derek and Vivian pay for their crimes. She looked up at the sky with a firm light in her eyes. The moment of revenge was coming. Chapter 6. Shutter Backlash. The day of shooting finally arrived. The abandoned warehouse was shrouded in gray clouds, revealing a depressing atmosphere. Ellie came to the warehouse early to make final preparations. She adjusted the lights one by one, and the lights drew bright lines in the dusty air, and the light and shadows were scattered on the dilapidated walls and the ground. Ellie's palms were full of sweat. She kept reciting the revenge plan in her heart, trying to calm her nervous emotions. Creaky, the door of the warehouse was pushed open and Derek and Vivian walked in. Derek was wearing a well-cut suit and carrying his iconic camera bag in his hand, while Vivian was wearing a tight dress and had an arrogant smile on her face. Ellie stepped forward and tried to make herself look calm and composed. "Derek, Vivian, you are here." Ellie tried to make her voice sound enthusiastic. Derek nodded slightly and scanned the warehouse. "Well, it seems that you are well prepared." Vivian glanced at Ellie with disdain and said nothing. Ellie pretended not to see it and took them to the prearranged shooting area. "Today's model has not arrived yet, let's debug the equipment first," Ellie said, pointing to the modified camera on the side, but her heart was in her throat. Derek put down his camera bag, picked up the modified camera, fiddled with it casually and muttered, "This camera looks a little different." Ellie's heart tightened suddenly, but she still pretended to be calm. "Oh, I found it in the second-hand market and I think its retro style is very suitable for this shoot." Derek didn't ask any more questions and began to adjust the camera parameters. Ellie watched nervously from the side, and every movement seemed to be played back in slow motion in front of her eyes. Finally, the models arrived and several young girls walked into the warehouse with some nervousness. The shooting officially began. Ellie guided the models to pose in various positions according to the plan, and kept giving Derek a look, signaling him to use the modified camera. Derek seemed to be infected by the atmosphere of the shooting, and gradually immersed in it, without noticing Ellie's strangeness. "This angle is good, Derek, try with that camera." Ellie pointed to a location with excellent light and said. Derek looked up, looked at Ellie and then looked at the camera in his hand. After hesitating for a while, he walked over. He raised the camera, aimed at the model, adjusted the focus, and at the moment he pressed the shutter, Ellie's heartbeat suddenly stopped. Click. The shutter sounded crisply and then Derek let out a painful scream. The camera in his hand seemed to suddenly come to life, emitting a strange light, and Derek's body began to tremble uncontrollably in the light. What's going on?" Vivian rushed over in horror, trying to grab the camera. Ellie grabbed the camera and shouted, "This is the punishment you deserve." At this time, wrinkles began to appear on Derek's face, his hair quickly turned gray, and his body seemed to be pulled by an invisible force and aged rapidly. Seeing this, Vivian screamed in horror and turned to run. "Do you think you can run away?" Ellie said coldly, pressing the shutter again. This time, the light of the camera enveloped Vivian, and her body began to age rapidly, her skin loosened, and the makeup on her face was distorted by fear. "No, it's impossible, how dare you!" Derek roared angrily, but his voice became weaker and weaker. Ellie looked at them without any mercy in her eyes. You have taken away the youth and lives of so many people with this camera. Today it's time for you to pay it back. Derek and Vivian collapsed to the ground and begged bitterly, but Ellie was unmoved. She watched them age little by little, and the hatred in her heart finally got a little relief. The light from the camera gradually faded, but Derek and Vivian had become two old men in their twilight years, their eyes filled with fear and despair. You ruined my life and the future of so many people. Ellie squatted down, looked at them and said, Now you will have a taste of this. The warehouse was filled with a dead silence, with only the faint breathing of Derek and Vivian. Ellie stood up, picked up the camera, turned around and walked out of the warehouse. The sun shone on her. She took a deep breath, feeling the long-lost freedom. In this battle of revenge she finally won. Chapter 7. Light and Rebirth. Holding the camera, carrying sin and revenge tightly, Ellie walked out of the abandoned warehouse step by step. The sunlight poured down without reservation, stretching her figure slender, as if to completely leave the past haze behind. Fine beads of sweat oozed out of her palms, wetting the cold shell of the camera, but she seemed not to notice it, just walking forward without looking away. Every step was firm and powerful. Back home, Ellie locked herself in the room and gently placed the camera on the table. She stared at it quietly. The faces of those who were hurt by Derek and Vivian kept flashing in her mind, and tears unconsciously blurred her eyes. I have avenged you, she whispered softly, and her voice echoed in the silent room, with a hint of relief and a hint of regret. After calming down, Ellie began to deal with the camera and evidence. She found a thick lead box and carefully put the camera in it, as if sealing a nightmare that she couldn't bear to look back on. Then she sorted out all the evidence she had collected, the yellowed clippings, the victims' diaries, and the communication records related to Derek and Vivian, and put them into the lead box. Every piece of paper, every word, carries the pain and grievance of the victims. Now they can finally witness the justice. Ellie brought the lead box to an abandoned cellar in the far suburbs of the city. It was overgrown with weeds and silent, with only the sound of the wind whistling in her ears. She pushed open the heavy door of the cellar with great effort, and a damp and rotten smell came to her face. She walked slowly down the mossy steps, and the dim light in the cellar made her figure look a little hazy. In the corner, Ellie stopped and used tools to carve a warning inscription on the wall. The greedy will eventually be swallowed by greed. Don't let this sin reappear in the world. She carved every stroke with great force, as if she wanted to deeply carve her anger towards Derek and Vivian, as well as her expectations for the future, into the hard stone wall. After completing all this, Ellie placed the lead box steadily in the corner of the wall, and covered it with a thick layer of dust and debris to ensure that it would not be easily discovered. She stood up, took one last look at the cellar, then turned around and walked away with a firm step. Coming out of the cellar, Ellie took a deep breath of fresh air, the sun shining on her face, bringing long-lost warmth. She knew that her life was about to open a new chapter. Ellie returned to the photography studio. The moment she pushed open the door, her colleagues looked at her in surprise. Ellie, you're back, a colleague shouted excitedly. Ellie smiled and nodded. Well, I'm back. In the days to come, I want to use my camera to record my life. She picked up the camera again and shuttled through the streets and alleys of the city. Street performers were singing enthusiastically. Their faces were filled with love for art and satisfaction with life. Children were chasing and playing in the square, and their silver bell-like laughter echoed in the air. The sun set, and the afterglow outlined the city's buildings with golden outlines, beautiful as a dream. Ellie captured these beautiful moments with her camera, and every photo was full of vitality and hope. The youth and vitality that Derek and Vivian had taken away seemed to be regained in these photos. Ellie's photography skills became more and more sophisticated, and her works began to be exhibited in various exhibitions, which were loved and praised by people. She used real lenses to let people see the ordinary and precious beauty in life, and also let those lives shrouded in darkness continue in another way in her works. At a photography exhibition, an old man stopped in front of one of Ellie's works and was reluctant to leave for a long time. It was a photo taken at dusk. In the picture, a young mother was holding her child's hand and walking on the street filled with afterglow. Their figures were stretched very long and their faces were filled with happy smiles. The old man turned around with tears in his eyes and said to Ellie, "Your photos remind me of my daughter. She was as happy as the child in the photo. Thank you for letting me see the hope of life." Ellie was slightly stunned and then her eyes were wet. She knew that everything she did was worth it. What she conveyed with her camera was not only beautiful moments, but also a love for life and a commitment to justice. As time went by, Ellie's life gradually got back on track. She had her own photography studio and trained a group of young people who loved photography. She often told them, "The meaning of photography is to capture the truth and beauty of life, and to convey warmth and strength with the lens." And the stories of those who had been hurt by Derek and Vivian were also recorded by Ellie in a photo album. This photo album is not only a commemoration of the victims, but also a warning to all the greed and evil in the world. It always reminds people that justice may be late, but it will never be absent. Ellie stood in front of the window of the studio, looking at the prosperous city outside the window, her heart full of emotion. The pain and suffering she had experienced have now become her motivation to move forward. She knew that the road ahead was still long, but she was no longer afraid, because her heart was full of sunshine, and the camera in her hand would continue to record the beauty of life and protect justice in the world.